outside now, closely monitoring that weather as it moves our way. In fact, our very own Jackie Coffin will join us in about 6 minutes for a better look outside. And also our Larry Rice will meet us later in the newscast for a complete look at the severe weather that we're tracking across Montana. Well, back to today's big story. Congressman-elect Greg Gianforte will serve no jail time for last month's assault on a reporter. Gianforte today pleaded guilty in Gallatin County Justice Court in Bozeman, which is where we find our David Winter, who attended Gianforte's hearing this morning. And David, we streamed live this morning the hearing, and you saw Gianforte you were able to grab Gianforte first as he came out of the courtroom. So what was the scene like?
Well, it was certainly a lot more crowded earlier this morning. Angela, I'm standing right where about a dozen reporters were staged when Greg Gianforte held an impromptu press conference immediately following his sentencing. Now, he first wanted to make a statement, and he said that he takes full responsibility for his actions. I wanted to know whether he thought the sentencing was just that was just imposed upon him. And just like many of people who were watching today in court, they thought his answers were evasive.
How do you wish to plead?
Guilty, Your Honor.
After pleading guilty to misdemeanor assault, the judge asked Gianforte to allocute to exactly what happened the night before the special election. But it took the judge's pointed questioning to drag out the admission.
I grabbed for his wrist.
Okay, and that injured him?
A scuffle ensued, and he was injured, as I understand it.
Okay, did you provoke the altercation that ensued using your words?
Yes.
Okay, and did you cause bodily injury?
I understand bodily injury resulted.
That wasn't my question. Did you cause bodily injury?
Yes.
It's what so many people had been waiting to hear, Mr. Gianforte's version of the story. The man he assaulted then gave in a much more direct fashion his version of what happened when he asked Gianforte a question.
Mr. Gianforte's response was to slam me to the floor and start punching me. He injured my elbow, broke my glasses, and thrust me into a national spotlight I did not seek or desire. Mr. Gianforte then lied in a defamatory public statement in which he insisted his unprovoked physical attack was somehow my fault.
Mr. Gianforte faced 6 months in jail and a $500 fine, but the county attorney recommended $585 in fines and fees and a deferred 6-month sentence, meaning no jail time if Gianforte remained a law-abiding citizen.
The things that have happened on May 24th is completely unacceptable.
The judge settled on 40 days of community service, 20 days of anger management, and a $300 fine, no jail time. We were first to ask Gianforte a question after the sentencing.
Mr. Gianforte, you had said immediately following this that you were sorry and that this wasn't you, but apparently it was you. Do you think anger management is appropriate for you? Do you think the sentence was appropriate for you?
Well, I take full responsibility for my actions. I didn't act in a way that was consistent with my behavior in the past, and that's why I was pleased to be here and get this done so we can move forward.
We tried asking Mr. Gianforte why immediately following the assault, he tried to blame Mr. Jacobs for the incident, and he then cut short his press conference only after a couple of questions, and he left the building. Ange?
All right, thanks, David. Now, I understand Gianforte also paid restitution to Jacobs, isn't that right?
Yes, actually. Along with this sentence, the county attorney stated that Mr. Gianforte paid Mr. Jacobs about $4,600 in restitutions for his injuries and for his broken glasses, and that's on top of the $50,000 that he donated, Mr. Gianforte donated to a journalism organization, and that was to try and stave off any civil litigation that Jacobs might have brought against him. Ange?
Now, David, did Gianforte say when he planned to complete his community service?
Yes, the attorney said actually that the Congress will take a break in August, and that's when Mr. Gianforte will come back from Washington and apparently serve out his sentence doing community service.
Now, David, I saw during the live stream that Gianforte addressed Jacobs during the hearing.
He did, actually. He wanted to make sure that he addressed Mr. Jacobs directly, and he again apologized to him. And he said that he wanted to sit down with Mr. Jacobs and have a talk after this is all over, which is actually lucky for Mr. Jacobs, because Mr. Jacobs said he wanted to do an interview with Mr. Gianforte after this was all over. Perhaps we'll get a chance to answer that question, or ask that question rather, of Mr. Gianforte that started this whole mess. Ange?